Hello, Mr. Smith here with 7th Hour U.S. History class. The election of 1972, another historic landmark. We're going to see the election itself was not that interesting. The outcome was pretty clear to everybody before it even started. So the election itself, not so interesting, but some of the events surrounding the election, very interesting, very historical. Let's take a look. So, the election of 1972 features Richard Nixon, who is the incumbent. He is the president. He's running for re-election. George McGovern will wind up being the Democratic Party's official nominee, official candidate for the Democratic Party. But George Wallace is back. He was around in the 68 election. He's back for the 72 election, and he is taking lots and lots of voters away from the Democrat Party. We'll get into that. First of all, Nixon has been in office for 4 years, tremendously popular. In this photograph, he's standing next to his vice president, Spiro Agnew. Now, you might ask what kind of a name is Spiro Agnew? That's a Greek name. Spiro Agnew was born in the United States, but his family was Greek, and so his first name is Spiro. So Nixon is strong and popular, and everything's going his way. He has started the process of ending the Vietnam War. He has created more opportunities for civil rights for African Americans. He's popular. George McGovern, you got to feel sorry for this guy. He's just not very well liked, not very well known. His party, once again, is in shambles. 1968, the Democratic Party had been in shambles. 1972, it's still that way. It's not going very well. But there's George. He ends up with the nomination, and he's going to try his best to run a campaign against Nixon. Nixon tours the country. His popularity just keeps growing. Meanwhile, here comes George McGovern, and George Wallace. There's two Georges, all right? This is George Wallace. He was the non-official, not the Democratic Party's official candidate or nominee, but he started an independent run and took millions of voters away from the Democrat Party. Why? Once again, George Wallace is in favor of segregation. George McGovern is opposed to segregation. So a lot of the Democrats leave the party because they want to vote for a segregationist like George Wallace. So Wallace is making things even worse for George McGovern. And then there's an assassination attempt. George Wallace is shot. What's going to happen? Wallace is going to have to drop out of the campaign. He is not killed. He is wounded. He is severely wounded, but he's not killed. But he drops out of the campaign. Even though he's no longer able to run for president, there's still millions of people who support him and do not want to vote for George McGovern. So even though Wallace is not part of the campaign anymore, he is still damaging George McGovern's chances. Now, all of this is getting lots of big headlines. A smaller article that nobody even noticed at the time was about a break-in. There was a group of guys breaking into an office, a Democratic campaign office. They were making photocopies of some files there. They installed some electronic surveillance devices to record phone calls. What's going on? Well, again, at the time, almost nobody noticed this, but it's going to start percolating and it's going to turn into a big, big problem later on. Yeah, this was the beginning of Watergate. But back to the main feature, Nixon versus George McGovern. They continue the campaign. It wasn't even close. Nixon by a landslide. Here you see the electoral map. Nixon won every single state except for Massachusetts. Pretty humiliating for McGovern and the Democrats. Nixon and his vice president Spiro Agnew celebrate. Everything's going his way. He's popular. But that little break-in, those guys sneaking into an office in the middle of the night to get copies of files and set up wiretaps to intercept phone conversations, that's going to haunt Nixon a few months down the road. Nixon got reelected. He gets to do another term as president, but stay tuned for Watergate to rear its ugly head. So, 1972, George Wallace gets shot. Not killed, but shot during the campaign. George McGovern, the candidate nominated by the Democrat Party, never had a chance. L for loser. George McGovern went down bad. But the real news was that during the 72 campaign, almost unnoticed, it wasn't the main issue at the time, but it would become the main issue a few months later. During that campaign, the break-in at the Watergate Hotel, and the president who won by a huge landslide only a few months later would become extremely unpopular and be forced to resign from office. So that's the election of 1972. See you later.